Hey friends, it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel, and I hope everyone had a happy Halloween. I did actually meet a friend last night for dinner, and we both dressed up, so I'm going to pop some pictures up here. I went as Special Agent Dana Scully from the X-Files, and she went as Bob Ross, which is very appropriate because she's just as talented as Bob Ross. She is an art teacher and she is a phenomenal artist, and she does an excellent impersonation of Bob Ross. She has his voice down pat, and it really puts me at ease. I could listen to her impersonate Bob Ross all afternoon. It's very calming, very soothing. But we had a lot of fun wearing our costumes. I couldn't do it for the video, but I do have an X-Files t-shirt on. This is something I picked up at Etsy. It's really cool. I don't know if you can see it. It kind of has a comic book look to it. Mulder and Scully there. So I hope that you all ate some candy, and you candy corn nuts. You guys got your fill and had a good night. I did read 2 books this week, so I'm going to talk about both of those. The first book that I read is one that most of you have probably already read or seen. It is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. And I actually went into this book completely blind. No pun intended. Actually, totally intended. I love puns. But I hadn't seen the film. I'd heard very little about it other than the fact that the villain in this is something that once you see it, the damage is already done. So I did know that the characters in this book had to be blindfolded. I was aware of that, obviously, but other than that, I knew nothing else about it. The title of this book kind of intrigued me, Bird Box, because I am terrified of birds. So the entire time I read this book, I was kind of on pins and needles and in suspense, waiting for the birds to appear. So that kind of added a level of anxiety for me personally, just because of my personal irrational fear of birds that I have. But I really enjoyed this book. This book is the best kind of horror for me because it induces that psychological terror without having to go into a whole lot of detail about the blood and gore. It's not gross or anything like that. Essentially, whatever this creature is, once you've seen it, it induces you to commit acts of homicide and eventually suicide. And the epidemic in the storyline starts in Russia, and then it spreads to Alaska, then Canada, and eventually to Michigan, which is where our story is set. And I also liked that part of the story. I liked the fact that the source of this threat or this creature was in the Arctic, because if you've ever seen the film The Thing from Another World from the 1950s, or the remake The Thing from the 1980s, there's something that is very unsettling and even more mysterious about having a scary story set in a very desolate, cold Arctic tundra. And so for me, this added an element of horror to the story. The fact that this threat kind of started in a very cold, desolate place and makes its way to Michigan over time. And so you kind of have this feeling of impending doom. And so this book kind of builds on that, which I really liked. There's also an X-Files episode in the first season that's set in a remote outpost in Alaska. And I can't remember the whole storyline, but it's some sort of science experiment, like geophysicist, or it's some sort of scientific study going on there. But yeah, very remote. And if anything goes wrong in a remote Arctic tundra area, it's going to be very difficult to get help. That's another thing about having something go wrong in an area like that. I definitely saw a lot of parallels in the storyline of Bird Box and a lot of the things that are going on in the world right now. So that was a little bit eerie, because our main character, Mallory, when this threat, this creature, makes its way to Michigan, she starts to see the people around her walk around with blinders on. And eventually some people start wearing blindfolds, and they start covering their windows with, heavy drapes and sheets. And at first she doesn't buy into this. She thinks it's hysteria, and she doesn't understand why people are doing this. And so I could definitely see some parallels, with the initial stages of the pandemic and the mask wearing, and kind of how people react to certain things and certain circumstances. And with any sort of crisis, you definitely see the best and the worst of humanity come out in people when they start competing for resources. And we definitely see that in Bird Box. We see Mallory's character, and I don't think I'm spoiling anything here by saying she does find herself with a group of strangers at a safe house, and they kind of band together to try to survive in this post-apocalyptic sort of time period. And you definitely see the best and the worst of humanity come out. And I think you definitely see that in the world right now, with how people react to a shortage of toilet paper or whatever the case may be. This book was a book that I pretty much finished in one sitting. I read it in a day, and I loved it. But the ending, there were some things with the ending that I wanted answers to, that I didn't get answers to. And some people might like that. And maybe it's a case where those questions are answered in the sequel to this, Mallory, Bird Box number 2. I don't know. I haven't read up on that sequel, so I don't know what's included in that. But it was a great book. I was waiting on pins and needles for the appearance of the birds, because I am absolutely terrified of birds. I have an irrational fear of birds. That's just a personal phobia of mine. And I will say there is one particular scene in this book that I found especially horrifying. And I haven't seen the Netflix film, but I did talk to my friend Allison, who is Bob Ross, and she did not think the scene I described in the book was in the film. So, and I don't know why, because in my mind, this scene was the most horrifying in the book. And I don't know if it was just so horrifying for me personally because of my fear of birds, but I got to the part, and I had been waiting for this to happen, and it happened, and it was absolutely terrifying. So definitely enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend it. Again, my only grievance with it is that there were some questions left unanswered that I really wanted wrapped up. The second book I read this week was The Couple Next Door by Shari Lapena. And this is about a couple named Anne and Marco Conti, and they have a 6-month-old baby. They have dinner plans with the couple next door, and essentially they live in townhouses, and so they share a common wall with their next door neighbor, and so they can literally hear the couple next door. And the couple next door doesn't particularly like children, so they don't want Anne and Marco to bring their 6-month-old daughter. So they have scheduled a babysitter to come, but the babysitter cancels. And so Anne and Marco decide to leave the baby at home and take the baby monitor next door and just check on the baby every 30 minutes or so. Well, they do this, and around 1 o'clock when they come home, the door is cracked and the baby is missing. And so this started out as a pretty thrilling mystery. It was pretty fast paced. The first half of the book I enjoyed. I will say that the characters were a little bit one-dimensional. They weren't particularly likable. Particularly the husband, Marco. I didn't like him, and if you read the book, his decision making is absolutely ridiculous and unbelievable. For starters, that's just to start with, but I got to the end of this book, and I just kind of sit there for a second, because the second half of this book was extremely convoluted, and it was more convoluted than a JFK assassination conspiracy, which is saying something, because I've read quite a few books on JFK assassination conspiracies, and they can get pretty twisted. This was pretty convoluted, and quite unbelievable, and it was kind of a departure from the first half of the book. So it wasn't terrible, but it was not for me. Someone who likes to read this sort of book might love it, and I do think this author has a lot of other books that have great reviews, and so I'm not saying I will never read another one of this author's books, because, like I said, it wasn't terrible, but it just got to be a little unbelievable, and I wasn't really invested in the characters enough to care a whole lot about what was going on, to be quite honest. There were so many things going on in this book. Without spoiling everything, I mean, if I listed off everything, even if I listed off everything that happens in this book, I don't feel like I would spoil it for you, because I don't think you could figure out how they were all connected. That's how convoluted it is. So yeah, I think I gave it a 2.5 on Goodreads, and I'm usually a pretty easy rater on Goodreads. I mean, very rarely do I give anything below 3 on Goodreads. I just feel like if I finish the book, it deserves at least 3 or 4 stars. But again, when I got to the ending, my head was just kind of spinning on this one. I don't know. So that was my reading week. I've started to read The Radium Girls, which is something that's been on my to be read list for a while. I'm going to dive into a lot of nonfiction this month, I think, and I'm going to read some JFK books, because one of my friends, Jenna, said she's watched my videos and I need to do more JFK. So JFK is on the way. Definitely going to get into that, because November 22nd is coming up, so I'm going to make sure that I get some JFK in there for sure. But I hope you guys had a great week, and thanks for tuning in. If you have read Bird Box or Mallory, the sequel, please shoot me a comment. Let me know if it's worth it to read the sequel or not. And if you've read The Couple Next Door, if you have any thoughts, if I missed something there, shoot me a comment. Let me know what you thought. And again, if you've read other titles by that author that you think I would like, I've seen she has a lot of stuff out there, so shoot me a couple of those titles. Let me know. Bye, guys. Have a great day. Thanks for joining me.